I am going to be prompting some different activities. So this first one is a reconnecting activity. So what I would like you to do is find a partner, preferably somebody that you don't know as well. If it's a comfort thing that you need to be with somebody that you do know, that's totally fine as well. But please find a partner and either stand across from them or sit across from them. This is a nonverbal activity. Figure out who's partner 1 and who's partner 2. To start, number 1 will respond to my prompts. And this is an embodied physical activity. It might make you real uncomfortable. I know the first time I did this, I was like, I gotta do what? So what I will do is I will give you a prompt, and you will embody it. You will demonstrate it. You will gesture it. You will emote it through your limbs, your face, however you are able to. And your partner will mirror you. Okay? Yeah, I like it. Okay, so for example, if I say how you respond to stubbing your toe, you might like literally be like jumping around. You might make a face, or you might mimic swearing. I don't know what your style is, but whatever it is, let an honest response come out of your body, and then your partner will mirror it back to you. Okay? And then we'll trade spots. It's a simultaneous mirroring. It's a simultaneous. So like you're really visually, somatically embodying mirror neurons right now. So one person expresses it, and the other person stays with them. Okay? Your evening routine on a Friday. And what you're doing when you feel most alive. My first question is actually, who was most uncomfortable responding to the prompt, initiating the action of the two experiences? Anybody?
I think number one.
Uh-huh. And why was that more uncomfortable for you? Anybody willing to speak to it?
Hard to think of. For me, it was hard to think of how to demonstrate.
It was hard to think of?
Especially with someone you just get to know.
Uh-huh. And there was a little bit of vulnerability of like, I'm showing you my experience. Any other comments about the experience of doing this in your body rather than with your words?
I think that's why it was hard to think of what to do, because we just go through those motions without being mindful or aware of what we're doing. So you can think in your head, like, well, this is what I do when I get home, but what does that look like? Or how do I act that out?
How was it to feel somebody else's experience in your body as you mirrored it? Did you notice a shift in your experience when you were mirroring somebody else's actions, besides the giggliness that came with?
Just in being conscious to try to really observe what they were doing and feeling kind of cautious to mirror it without misrepresenting or something.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. This can really highlight how prone we are to miscommunication, right? Like, even if I'm doing the exact same thing, is what my body feels what your body is actually feeling, right? Am I actually understanding what you're trying to relate? One of the really unfortunate things about language is that because we share a word, we think we have the same meaning, and we often have a very different meaning for what the word is or what the concept is. So it's interesting to start playing with. And being in our bodies is where change happens, right? Experience influences who we are and how we grow and how we develop. We're going right into another experiential. Please stand up. This is a 3-ish part experiential. So the first part, you have two things that you're responding to. Walk or stop. Any questions? Okay, pretty simple, right? So walk. Stop. Walk. Stop. Stop. Walk. Walk. Stop. Okay, you all understand those basic commands? I'm going to add two more. So the two new prompts are clap or stomp. I don't have shoes on anymore for self-care reasons, so you couldn't really hear that. But so you now have four things that you may respond to. And I know that stop and stomp kind of sound alike, so I'll try to enunciate for you. Clap. Walk. Stomp. Keep walking. Clap. Clap, clap. Stop. Stomp. Stomp, stomp. Walk. Clap. Clap, clap. Stomp, stomp. Good. Okay, go ahead and stop. So now it's going to get a little bit funky. So walk and stop now mean the opposite. When I say walk, you stop. When I say stop, you walk. And clap and stomp mean the opposite. So when I say stomp, you clap. And when I say clap, you stomp. All right, take a deep breath. Just do it to the best of your ability. Walk. Clap. Stop. Clap. Stomp, stomp. Stop. Ooh, good. Stop. Clap. Walk. Stomp, stomp. Stomp, stomp. Walk. Clap. Good. Go ahead and go back to your seats. Experience shapes who we are, and the more we experience something, the more ingrained it is, right? So it took effort to have a different experience with something that you have so well practiced, like walk and stop and clap. Right? Those are like 4K sort of things that we work with, right? And it is an embodied experience of the brain and how the brain works in our nervous system and in our bodies. There's a famous quote by Donald Hebb that neurons which fire together wire together. So your body knows that the word walk means move my legs, right? That it's an arbitrary word, but it's wired with an action. It's wired with an experience in your body. When it comes to trauma and the experiences of trauma and the things that get wired together, we are working with a lot of different things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get to some of the other content this afternoon, but the brain impact of trauma is on the gray matter. So that part of that means that it reduces how much your brain connects to other things, connects to planning, organization, those executive function things that we value so much in school settings can be reduced and impacted. We have seen that trauma, especially long-term trauma or extreme types of trauma, will impact the corpus callosum, meaning that the middle part of your brain that helps communicate between the hemispheres is reduced. And part of that has to do with the fact that the axons, the part of the neurons that communicates, that sends the signal, loses its myelination. It loses its action in sending those messages because your brain is more concerned with survival than with some of those other types of communication. That information of trauma, especially after freeze experiences, gets locked in our amygdala most of the time. And our amygdala is our emotion center. Much of our amygdala is actually on the right side of our brain. So, going back to EMDR, I kind of hinted at EMDR as a modality for trauma recovery earlier. The bilateral experience of EMDR can help stimulate the bilateral communication in the brain and encourage that communication, that information to be processed more than just in the amygdala. When that starts happening, people start to be able to process it differently. They start to understand it, they start to notice different things, they start to be able to make meaning in a way that they can integrate and come back to being a whole person. There's lots of different therapies that can do that. What I would say is that regardless of whether it's TFCBT or EMDR or somatic experiencing, one of the primary features in all of those is the relationship. It is that holding, nurturing, supporting relationship where somebody is witnessing you saying, I'm here with you even while it gets mucky. The hippocampus is our memory center, and memories can be really intense from traumatic experiences. Flashbacks are part of the symptomology of it. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that sits right on top of the amygdala. And it actually uses its memory to keep the amygdala in check. So one of the things that I was taught as a therapist is that being a therapist is like being an external hippocampus for somebody else. And parenting is a lot like that too. Because kiddos, their brains aren't developed yet. They don't have as many memories to reference off of, so they kind of borrow our brains. Like, I don't know if I'm okay, are you okay? Yep, we're good still. So being in relationship, working with your own regulation is being an external hippocampus while somebody else's amygdala is firing or overwhelmed. And then the prefrontal cortex, where the executive function is also one of the areas that we see quite a bit of impact from prolonged exposure to trauma. So the triune brain was a concept by Dan Siegel. He has some videos online about it, and the way that he teaches it is with the hand model. And this is a great thing to teach kids. They catch on to it really quickly. And so if you just make a little fist with your thumb in the middle, there you have a little nervous system, right? So here is your spinal cord, which is actually the first part of your nervous system that reacts to any sort of stimulus. Your spinal cord is where reflexes happen. So it just ricochets right off when you get whacked in the knee, your knee goes. Your brain isn't doing that, your spinal cord is. Then it goes up to the hindbrain, which is the survival brain, or in a lot of school settings we call it the reptilian brain. This is the part of your brain that is about basic survival function and homeostasis. So breathing, resting, digestion, all of those things are here. This part of your brain is like a thermometer for how your nervous system is doing, because if your breath suddenly, your breath is regulated by that part of your brain and is telling you, okay, something is impacting my survival sense, something like my regulation is being impacted right now. After information is processed by the hindbrain, it goes to the midbrain, which is like your little thumb here. Your midbrain is the amygdala and the hippocampus that I was just talking about, so it's your memories and emotions. So information comes in, not a reflex, not something directly related to, not your like internal homeostasis with your hindbrain, goes up to your midbrain. And unfortunately for humans, one of the things that happens here is that we have all learned rules about emotions. And we have really strong memories connected to emotions. So when we have a strong emotion, that might actually trigger us into a fight, flight, freeze response. This is especially true in contexts where kids have grown up in domestic violence situations. So if anger equals violence, then anger is a dangerous emotion. Even if something dangerous is not happening, what fires together, wires together, it becomes connected. Does that make sense? Okay. So the fight, flight, freeze response happens here. It's very intensely connected to the hindbrain and the survival impulses that we have. In the case that information continues to go up into the prefrontal cortex, which is your fingers on the front of this little hand model, that is when you process it, you use logic, you use planning and strategy and those things, again, that are very, very valued in our society and prioritized and sought in school settings especially. But what happens when we experience trauma or when we experience a trigger about trauma is we flip our lids. We go, woo, no longer have that prefrontal cortex. So planning, executive function, the thing, logic. You know, anybody tried to argue with somebody who wasn't using any logic? Right? It's not there. It's not an easy thing to do, right? And kids love this as well. They're like, Mom, you did it. Mom, I'm flipping my lid right now. It's great because as soon as I do this, it's like, okay, then let's do turkey breaths. And I'll go, and each finger is one of each really deliberate, slow breaths, because if I go down to my breath and I work with my survival brain, my body is then giving me the feedback that my brain can come back online. What we've seen from brain imaging of trauma and grief, they go hand in hand, is that blood flow literally recedes from the prefrontal cortex and goes directly into the midbrain and the hindbrain. So after I lost my brother, I had an experience of, wow, I have to go back to my house like 8 or 9 times to make sure that I have everything. Like I forgot my keys. I don't have my backpack somehow. It was just this, like, I could not remember things that I thought were automatic, and I would misplace things a lot. For the first time in my life, I was locking myself out of my car. It was just a lot of feedback from my body that I just neurologically could not do it. Luckily, I was in a context where I could have compassion for myself in that. Unfortunately, in our society, we have pretty low tolerance for grief processes. We expect people to finish grief pretty quickly. And it's not realistic neurologically. In a lot of contexts, so especially non-mental health, non-trauma-informed contexts, we are kind of told that you're just supposed to be regulated all the time. You're this green line that maybe you go up and then you go down a little bit, but everything's kind of hunky-dory. I have no idea where that phrase came from. I usually am very conscious about the history of the phrases I use, and I have no idea the history of that one. But the reality is this ebb and flow is natural. There is a constant wave that happens inside of our nervous systems, just like the circadian rhythm of the sun moving, just like the cycle of the seasons. There is a constant motion that is happening. And for some reason, there has become a value on being static, on I'm always okay. Somebody asks you at the grocery store, how you doing? Fine. Right? There's not a lot of authenticity or flexibility with that norm. Many people experience more like this yellow line, where they flirt with the edges with various different things. So for example, this yellow line might be somebody who has a hard time waking up in the morning and maybe presses snooze like 6 or 7 times. They're just on that edge of waking up, and then they get their caffeine and they're like, woo, ready to go. And they might have a little caffeine crash a little bit later. And maybe they have some sort of trigger or big stressor at work. Maybe a deadline is coming up and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this thing. Or they have a stressful work evaluation and they get overstimulated a little bit. The great thing about this yellow line is that even though there's moments of dysregulation, this person is staying within their zone of proximal development. So even though if they're totally regulated when they're inside those zones, there's a little zone on each of those edges, right, where you're still learning, you're still with it a little bit. So when we stay with those states, we're growing. At least we have the opportunity to grow and expand. Everyone has their own baseline window. Everybody has their own baseline lower threshold for what they can tolerate and upper threshold for what they can tolerate. So for me, my window has changed over time. And at this point in time, my lower threshold is probably really low, like it goes deep into that, send me all the depressed clients. Don't actually, but I can sit with depression and sadness and grief, traumatic grief, works for me. I can be there with people and still be regulated as far as those signs of regulation on that sheet where I'm present, I'm clear-headed, I feel competent, I'm with it, right? But I don't necessarily have as high of a threshold for the hyperarousal symptoms for various reasons. One of that probably has to do with the particular type of traumatic grief I have from my brother, but the rest of it actually has to do with socialization. That when I was a kid, if I got too excited, I was told not to be, very clearly, and sometimes harshly, because now that I look back on it, my dad had auditory sensitivity difficulties, and when we got too loud, it would totally blow his system because his ears couldn't tolerate it. But the message to me was, don't get too big, don't get too big, don't get too big, don't have too big of, even if it was a positive emotion, too much pleasure was also an issue. So does that make sense? The window changes based off of your resources. So that's my baseline window where I can go real low and I can I've worked on having a moderate upper threshold, but I have a limit to how much I have grown there, right? But on days where I haven't slept for more than 3 hours for 3 days in a row, I might be a little bit more like this, where my window is squashed. And those are the moments where I'm I don't know why I'm responding like this, but I am anyway. Anybody have those? This isn't usually an issue, right? Those are the days, and that's information. It's information about how resourced we are in that moment. Often when we're working with trauma, it looks more like this red line, where somebody wakes up from a night terror and they go straight from being unconscious to totally overstimulated. Maybe in this case, this person has some strategies for being it's not real, I'm in my bed, I'm orienting to my space, and they come back down, but then often they'll crash again pretty quickly, right? And then they'll come back up and they might be functioning for a little bit, but then there's a trigger, and what we might see is ping-ponging from hyper to hypo to hyper to hypo, and just I'm overwhelmed, I'm collapsed. I'm overwhelmed, I'm totally collapsed, right? And this is kind of the epitome of an infant, right? So infants are either sleeping or crying in a lot of cases. That's an exaggeration, of course, but there's a process of navigating not being able to regulate and the crash that comes after that. And there's a lot of learning that happens at that age, and there's a lot of processing and wiring that happens from that experience. But as we get older, this is really stressful. It's not, and often is not a very pleasant experience for people. And this is where a lot of the behaviors that are very stigmatized in our society come in. This is one of my favorite models. This is from Dewey Freeman. He's a therapist, equine psychotherapist in Colorado. And this is his model for attachment. And it works really well with the neuroscience stuff that we're going with. Starting at the top, we have food, touch, and movement. he puts those 3 things as the primary needs because those are the 3 things that are automatically met in utero. So in utero, you have automatic access to food, you have automatic access to touch, you have automatic access to movement by virtue of being inside of another human being, right? So those are really basic needs that once birth happens, a baby has to negotiate for the first time in their life, right? So they have a need for one of those things, and then they express it. They go to the right side of that cycle, and they might go, I need a diaper change, right? And ideally, someone will go, oh, you're squirmy. Let me just check. Are you hungry? Nope. Oh, you need a diaper change. Great, let's take care of that. So then the needs are met, and then the baby goes, oh, I'm okay. And infants are going through this super fast. It's like, need? Fine. Need? Okay, I'm good. Nah, I want this other thing too, right? It's about going through this multiple times that develops a sense, an internalized sense that the world is okay and that I will be met, my needs will be met in relationship. In the context that a newborn or a child doesn't get this, you might see one of those other 3 things happen. Rage, because it's kind of infuriating to consistently be let down or consistently not have your needs met. Shut down, that's going back to the fawning and the learned helplessness, right? So how not getting your needs met consistently can trigger those trauma reactions. And then one of the other things that we'll see is addiction to those needs themselves. So if I know that if I ask for something or if I need something that it's going to be met by a person, then I trust the person. But if I don't trust anybody, if I'm like, y'all are bunk, I'm going to go take care of myself on my own, then I might use food or substances or over-exercise or sex addiction or gambling or any of those other things that feel good because they are a need, but I'm disconnected in that process. And then the cycle gets faster, right? Because there's an attempt to regulate through that. There's an attempt to feel better, but it's missing relationship. Any questions about this or comments? This is a model for parent-infant attachment, but the reality is, as far as orienting to space and developing safety in relationship, we're kind of always doing this with everybody. I mentioned at the beginning that there was only so much depth of relationship that you would get to have with me in this short period of time, because there's only so many times that you thought, is Jess actually going to get to this point? Or like, oh, where are we going here? And whether I came through or not, right? So the times that you felt bored, the times that you felt skeptical, the times that you were like, I don't know about that, were the times that I maybe didn't meet your need in that moment. Because I cannot physically track all of you at the same time. But I can keep coming back. I can keep coming back. There's always another opening and another opportunity. We are constantly figuring out trust and safety in every single relationship. It's through this process of self-regulation, through this process of self-reflection, that we expand our capacity for pain, that we expand our capacity for the inconvenient and uncomfortable, and we hold ourselves through it. And the more we hold ourselves, the more we can stay regulated even when the people we work with are not or cannot be regulated themselves. Because as we stay consistent in that, they get to go through that trust cycle. They get to go, I have a need, it's met. I have a need, it's met. And then they might have a moment where they're like, really scary that you meet my needs because nobody's met my needs and I really don't want to trust that and that might be too much, right? And then you're like, that's cool too, I'll be here. The more that we hold ourselves, the more that we can hold other people that we work with. the more that they can learn to hold themselves and the more that they can show up for their kids. That is where the sustainability in this process comes in, is in the constant practice of relationship with self so that I can show up in relationship with other. Most often when we talk about trauma, we talk about physical and emotional danger as the threats to our nervous system, the things that make us go, danger, danger, danger. However, there are these 3 other ones that have been identified. So one is the unknown, right? The unknown can be really stressful for people. This is why kids who struggle with transitions get super dysregulated with them. And what happens when you make the unknown known and they're like, oh, this is what that transition is going to be and we're going to do this, and then, okay, got it, I'll do that. Right? This is why I am explicit at the beginning about my underlying assumptions for the training. Being explicit, making the unknown as known as possible, can support the wiring of our brains, can support this coming online where we're like, I feel safe enough, I can think through this, I can process, I can solve problems. So that when we're faced with the unknown in a real way, that it's like, this is an unknown and I can't figure it out, we might have a little bit more tolerance for it. Because there's things that we don't know, right? So when a kid goes, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. How are we going to do it? Coming in and being like, I don't know, but let's figure it out, right? Modeling that, like, okay, it's unknown and it's scary, and that's okay that it's scary, and we're okay still. Incongruence. This is a big one. This is a really, really big one, and it might be like the focus of the rest of my career, I think, because we are so good, especially as adults, about being incongruent. It's going back to that, how are you doing today? I'm fine. Right? Or in more exacerbated situations, it's like, why are you so angry? I'm not angry. Right? Okay, so there's that resistance, there's that information again about what's happening in somebody's nervous system. Gives us some clues. Incongruence is often one of the most prevalent things in addiction situations. It's very difficult to be congruent about your emotional and cognitive experience and to be present when you're in an altered state. It's nearly impossible. Incongruence is a big part of domestic violence situations. It's that cycle of going like, we're totally okay, explosion. How did this happen? How did we get here? Right? Kiddos are really, really good at cueing in to incongruence. And it's kind of infuriating for adults sometimes because they're really good at pointing out what we're hypocritical about. And we don't want to be hypocritical, right? Our self-perception is like, I'm consistent, I'm solid, I'm good. And then it's like, why are you doing this thing? I don't want to look at that. No thanks. Right? So incongruence is crucial because if the environment, thinking back to like the evolution of our brain, if the environment changes, right? If you are walking, birds are chirping, everything's hunky-dory, and then it's silent, that incongruence is an evolutionary tool for us to know something's off here. Something doesn't feel right. I need to be paying attention. And whether that is because all the birds are flying away because there's a tsunami coming, or whether that is because there is a predator nearby, and it's information about how to survive. And then the last one is shoulds. This one is huge as well because I don't know about you all, but I'm really good at judging myself. I am my best critic, or worst, depending on how you want to look at it. Right? Shoulds are a literal sense of othering. So when somebody says, you should have known better, it's like, okay, but I didn't. There's an incongruence there and a judgment there. And when the judgment is there, there's a fear of whether we'll recover or not. Can we repair? Can we come back from this? So when it comes to resilience, there are several things that help us recover from trauma, but also mitigate the likelihood of symptoms from trauma. There's various research about these, and I would like to hear from somebody, hopefully who hasn't been talking as much, about how you see these resilience and protective factors show up in your work.
There's so many ways. Like I'm looking at them like they're all connected.
They're all connected is one, yes.
Yes. I don't think. I mean, they are all connected. Caregiver, if a caregiver is competent at coping, they can mirror that or model that for their kid. So the kid can learn that. If the parent is not, stressed out because of concrete needs and they have their basic needs met, they're not overwhelmed and they're more capable of coping and capable of modeling. Even if a parent is incapable, if a child has another adult who can model those things, even if it's not a primary caregiver, if it's an auxiliary caregiver, I suppose, they get to learn through social learning.
So in the context of being a service provider working with youth, it helps, like considering these things helps me to not take things personally and be able to continue providing services in a qualitative manner without being affected as much by all the things that my clients are going through.
So working with those things with your clients supports your resilience as well. Great. Any other comments? These are pretty straightforward, but like how they show up in your workplace will vary. I have the term regulating interventions on these next three things, partly because I'm a therapist, but really it just means like these are the things that support resilience. These are the things that we can build and offer either in our work environment, because if it's in our work environment then we show up better, or explicitly when we're working with people. So play. Play is so important. There's been laughter in this room today. I guarantee you're going to remember more and feel more about this presentation because you laughed, because it helped you integrate, because it changed the hormones moving through your body that help your brain remember things. So whether it's games, whether it is dance, whether it is music, play is crucial for the resilience for children and for adults. A big part of why play therapy is popular is because it's been demonstrated that children process and learn through play. So they do something, they experience something at home, and then they're given an opportunity to play, and they're like, it's time to go clean your room, right? I'm guessing that they heard that somewhere else. Right? They're processing it, they're making sense of it, they're practicing it, which helps them build their neurons around it and what it means to them. So the more that we play, the more that we find openings with kiddos and between the kids and their parents or caregivers to be able to respond to whatever distressful things are coming up, because it'll show up in the play too. This can be a really tender area for some parents. Because it can bring up a lot of grief. So for parents or caregivers who didn't have somebody who played with them, or who didn't have somebody get excited about the things that they were creative with, showing up for play might trigger things that aren't processed yet. And that's where the holding comes in again. It's okay, that's really hard, and we're gonna do that. And what supports can we do? How can we keep I see you trying. It's It's okay that you're sad, and let's try again. Keeping coming back, because it's not the issue is not the rupture, right? And that it's unfortunate that trauma is as pervasive as it is. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need to shatter in order to reintegrate. But the repair process is really where the wholeness comes back in. Force begets resistance, whether it's as benign as a little finger trap or me just, what do you want to do? Does anybody else want to punch me? You're not there yet? Right? But notice, the more I push, notice what happens with her body. Notice how it leans in, how it adds to the brace. Right?
I leaned and you weren't there.
Yeah, oh, I was there. I just wasn't as there.
Yeah.
Right? So force, and we do this in all sorts of ways, when we want change to happen faster than it's happening, when we have shoulds, that sort of thing. I'm not getting much movement that way, right? But if I can soften, if I can explore what it means for me to be in contact with you rather than making you move, we have the possibility of moving in a different way. And it might be slow work. It might not be in the direction that you first were looking for. But all of a sudden it's together, instead of me just trying to make a decision for her. Are you willing to share what that shift was like?
Yeah, it just was much more like calm and in tune versus just like so like butting heads.
So yeah, it's not so abrasive.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In order for me to move Neely, I had to soften. Vulnerability is softness. It's engaging with self. It's being tender. It is the birthplace of wholeheartedness, as Brene Brown refers to it. And especially when we're working with people who have a lot of trauma, exploring honesty with that has the potential to make that pain become something else. Thank you all for your participation. It's a lot of content in one day. I imagine that you might be as tired as I am. Thank you.
Thank you.